Welcome aboard this wonderful conversations we are going to have with some eminent personalities working on co-benefit indicators from around the world. To give you a context, we started very small. We were very excited that for every meeting we were having with cities, and we were talking about greenhouse gas emissions with so many of our cities, there were Lahti, Braga, Uppsala, Riga, so many cities that we were visiting. We talked about measuring, emissions, talking about mitigation. A lot of times our cities came back and said, we want well-being for our people. We are looking at nature. We are looking at cultural heritage and health for our youth. So that's where this session took birth, where we said, how are our cities thriving? So celebrating climate action through health, nature, and culture. And I want to thank right in the beginning my colleague Naomi, who has supported me on this journey, and the many panelists we are going to introduce now. We're going to start with a few very short 5-minute pitches from our panelists. And I hand over the floor to Ingrid so that we don't waste a lot of time, Ingrid. I'm going to actually post your biography in your profile in the chat. You're more than welcome to begin. And you are really a very important pivot in this conversation. So thank you for taking part with us in it. Thank you, Ingrid. Welcome aboard.
Thank you so much, Nupur, and I trust my presentation will come up. But maybe before that, and while we're waiting for it to come up, is what I'm going to do is really just look at nature and nature's contributions to people. These are the services and the gifts, as it were, that nature gives to us. You can move to the next slide. And I want to start with just stopping at the value of nature in cities. We know that there are different types of ecosystem services or nature's contributions to people. These could be provisioning services. They could also be sorry, someone muted me. They could also be regulatory services and supporting services. And it's anything or everything from wetlands that and mangroves that attenuate floods, or the functioning of decomposition of waste, pollinators, and even just the use and the relationship that we have with open spaces or green spaces or trees or mountains for some other cultural or spiritual or religious value. If you can take me to the next slide. And while we do that, I think it's also important to understand that these services and nature itself is fundamental to our human sustainability, our economies, but particularly also our health and well-being. And this is probably a lesson that we as humans learned very well during COVID, when we were locked down and we couldn't go out. And the one place that it was safe to go was into nature, into the parks or into the beach or the forests, etc. So what we're trying to show with this slide is the interlinkages and the connections between nature, health, and climate. And what happens with the health of plant and animal communities if there is interference in those natural systems, or if there's a lack of good hygiene, etc. That's when the diseases, the pathogens, etc. start passing into humans, and we get the sorts of things that we have seen in the past with epidemics, etc. If we keep this planet, animal, people in a healthy relationship, then everything works well. And that affects things such as biodiversity. It affects human health and well-being, particularly mental health. It also affects things such as social relations and interactions. And it's really important to understand those interconnections and to understand the thing that stands at the middle is biodiversity and ecosystems. And if we start messing with those connections and those relations, that's when things start going out of kilter. If you can take me to the next slide, what I'm trying to do there is really just to pull us back now and see what is the global policy framework. There are lots of frameworks that are important, but the one that I want to focus on, and I'm not going to go into the climate a space and look at the climate frameworks or the One Health and the World Health Organization's frameworks, I want to focus on the Kunming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. This was adopted in Montreal in 2022, and it's called the Biodiversity Plan for Life on Earth. And it has a lot of underpinning messages. One is that we're all responsible and we all need to be involved, the whole of government and whole of society, in protecting our biodiversity. But it's really interesting that within this framework also, for the first time, it sort of codifies nature-based solutions, but it sets it aside and says it's not just planting any tree in any place. We need to look at it also from the perspective of what is right for the ecosystem of that particular location. So we talk about nature-based solutions or ecosystem-based approaches. The last thing we want to do is have a greening program that then creates problems that upsets that delicate balance between species, ecological connectivity, humans, and animal interaction. I think the other thing that's really important is that for the first time in a global framework, we have a target that speaks specifically to enhancing green spaces, urban planning, etc., for human well-being and biodiversity, putting them on the same. And then also a target that relates to maintaining nature's contributions to people and how cities and people can contribute to this. The next slide, please. What I want to stop on here in the next slide is something else that's really important for us, and it's going to be the topic of our discussion also today, is the whole issue of measuring and how we measure impact and how we measure effect, etc. There's a number of things out there in terms of formal decisions that I've listed. I'm not going to go to them in any detail. I've just mentioned them. But when it comes to biodiversity, and particularly at the level of cities, how do we measure impact? Do we have enough green spaces? Is the quality and size of these green spaces or blue spaces enough? Are we protecting our natural assets, our biodiversity? Have we done enough in terms of planning and mainstreaming biodiversity into investment decisions or planning decisions, spatial, territorial planning, etc.? There is a body of work that is ongoing as we speak around the monitoring framework for this. It is not an easy thing. They've set headline indicators, global indicators, and complementary indicators. And you can see on the screen there, I've indicated what the indicators are for target 12, which, as you remember just now, I explained, this is the target that speaks to urban green and blue spaces for human health and well-being. And it's not an easy one. It talks about the average, the spaces built up, how close it is, the quality of the spaces, etc. But even so, I think we're going to find, as these are going to be debated in the next biodiversity COP in Cali in October this year, there is a lot of difference. And I think what we're going to have to find is we're going to have to give cities some leeway, some freedom and some flexibility to articulate these indicators in a way that fits in with local priorities and indicators as well. And just if you move on to the next one, just quickly to show that there are a series of tools that we can use. The one that I have up here is the Cities Biodiversity Index. It's a self-assessment tool. You can see there I've given some indication of how they do this. It has a built-in calculator. It has a rationale for each of these indicators. There's a set of 35, including things like health, climate, etc. That's just one of them. There's also the Urban Nature Index that the IUCN has developed. And if you move on to the next slide, which is my last one, just very quickly to show that this is from the Urban Nature Index, and it shows some of the drivers and some of the consumption pressures and the human pressures and the sorts of things that are measured within that human Urban Nature Index as well. And the last thing I want to do, and you can take me to the closing slide, but the last thing I just want to say is that there is a reporting platform that is recognized in the CBD decision. It's the Cities with Nature, Regions with Nature reporting platform. It's aligned with the global targets, including Target 12. And we've already seen cities starting, and this is an actual example from one of the cities, which has indicated how they are addressing this Target 12 about promoting people's access to green and blue spaces, setting their own baselines, setting their own targets, and reporting on this. And I think that's it. So I'll hand back to you, Nupur. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ingrid. You really set us off with the right tone. And I think it's just brilliant. We're taking you now to our next speaker, Han, who's talking about Revalue and the new European Bauhaus. And please, if you're interested, keep putting your questions in your little piece of paper, because you'll go back to your different breakout rooms and pose those questions to each of the speakers. Han, it's all yours now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nupur. I will shortly introduce you to a new European Bauhaus-inspired impact model that we are using to help cities with addressing complex urban projects and issues, of course, with a view on maximum well-being in those cities as well. The model is based on a set of indicators or topics, and that set is made as concise and as compact as possible, as user-friendly as possible, but at the same time exhaustive. And I need to mention also here that while doing this work, we will always build further on indicator sets that cities have already in use. So it's very important in our view that we don't ask the cities to restart the process of defining new indicators, but leveraging on what they have in order to start to have a systems view and leverage on co-benefits. Next slide, please. So what are our intentions with that impact model? We want to have different stakeholders and actors, local politicians, city administrators, investors, citizens, enterprises, to get a whole systems understanding of the issue at hand, whether that's a renovation project or a renewable energy infrastructure that is collective and so forth. So for complex interventions in cities. We want also to enhance decision-making and also raise awareness amongst different stakeholders about each other's issues. And so enhance mutual understanding. We want at the same time to map any relevant materials that support decisions, and also see if there are any knowledge gaps at certain points. And then as a last step, we want to identify co-benefits, we want to qualify them, we want to quantify them if we can. And then in a last step, if that is opportune, we will also try to monetize them. And as such, we can also start to identify possible win-win situations where one intervention can do many things at the same time. Next slide, please. So what we try to do is, instead of taking solutions and just putting them there, is trying to make a whole systems constellation of them that makes more sense than all the solutions just taken individually, one beside each other. Next slide, please. So this is the impact model. I will not go into details if you would be interested, so we can do that also in a breakout session. So we have the three known pillars of sustainability definitions, like the economic, the ecologic, and the social pillar. But we have added really as important pillars also the governance process and the urban quality of life indicators, which are a little bit between environmental and social. Next slide, please. Now, just to give an example on how we work with cities on those kind of subjects, here you see the ring road around a historic city center in Belgium in its current state. And you see a canal on the left, you see some poor greenery, both on the left side and the right side. You see 4 car lanes, and you see an emergency lane that is being used as a parking area for lorries and mobile homes and so forth. So not the ideal kind of urban landscape if you speak about mobility or attractiveness or user friendliness for example, active transport. So what we are doing is we are getting around the table with all stakeholders, not only mobility people, but users, people involved in nature-based solutions, if you want. And next slide, please. We will use the impact model, of which you'll see a kind of adaptation on the right hand, to start to see what really matters if, for example, you would say that you will rearrange the city ring road into a system with only 2 car lanes, so 1 car lane in every direction, much better infrastructure for biking and walking, footpaths, wide cycling roads with all the safety measures on crossroads, breaking up quite an amount of the asphalt, replacing it by greenery that is not poor, but really qualitative and so forth. And then we start to have a wider discussion on what are all the possible benefits of such a holistic intervention. Of course, changing the traffic system in the sense that I just explained would have direct sustainability benefits, like creating a modal shift towards sustainable modes and providing more space for active and public transport. And of course, also reducing carbon emissions because of that modal split. But then you can start to think of co-benefits, and those are quite many. So by reducing the dependence on individual car traffic, you will most probably increase traffic safety, you will reduce air pollution, by greening up, reducing the amount of asphalt on that area, you will reduce the urban heat island, you will reduce noise levels, and we all know that for health and well-being, all those factors are really essential. Moreover, if we look to the water side of the issue, because we are depetrifying surface, we will also have healthier rain, surface, and groundwater cycles. We will increase the green-blue network functions in the city, not only for providing active transport, but also just to reinforce green-blue networks. And think if that's really a well-thought design, we will also increase the landscape quality and the cultural value. And then on top of that come even other societal co-benefits, which are, of course, that you go for increased health and well-being, and that you are future-proofing your city. And that's the way how we work with the impact model on different intervention types. And here I will stop.
Thank you very much, Han. What you've done magically is you've connected the previous presentation of Ingrid's on nature-based solutions with the next presentation of Eliane on transport and mobility. So thank you very much. Eliane, we are totally waiting to hear from you. Please.
Thanks, Nupur. Thanks, Han. Indeed, I see a big connection from the last slide from Han. So I will talk about indicators for sustainable mobility and how we are evolving to a more cross-sectorial and co-benefit approaches. Next, please. So first of all, what is the purpose of indicators in mobility or in other fields? Indicators, they are a powerful tool to simplify, quantify, analyze, and communicate complex information. And they may reflect at the first layer what we want to measure, but also what we want to achieve, what are our targets and goals. And in a broader way, what do we give value as a society? What is the narrative? What is the vision of the world we have? And this also evolves, and the indicators, they also might evolve with this and change. Next, please. So about indicators on sustainable mobility, they evolved from a narrow to a broader perspective and measurement. In the 80s and 90s, the focus was on environmental sustainability and environmental indicators, for instance, measuring greenhouse gas emissions, air and noise pollution, and then broadening to include also economic and social indicators and perspectives. And nowadays, we also talk more about mobility and other sectors, universal accessibility, transport poverty, just transition, mobility as a right, and also the need to connect mobility with other sectors and also the co-benefits. Therefore, we discuss more the need to address inclusion of all social groups, citizen participation, gender aspects, justice and equity, and mobility as a fundamental right, and how it may affect all the other activities like education, employment, social inclusion, healthcare, and living conditions. Next, please. And in this last overview, I will also address some of the cornerstones for mobility planning and monitoring. One of them is the Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan, the SUMP, which provides principles and planning approaches for cities about how they might develop and implement their Sustainable Urban Mobility Plan. And in the left, you can also see what is the SUMP, the steps, and one of the steps includes setting targets and indicators. SUMP is also part of the TEN-T, the Trans-European Transport Network, which is an instrument to plan and develop a coherent and efficient transport infrastructure across Europe. And they are connected to the third element, the Urban Mobility Indicator called UMI, and previously called SUMI, which meant Sustainable Urban Mobility Indicators. They are a tool to encourage cities to measure and also collect data in a more standardized way and in a way that they could compare. And the last 2 points are also the discussion we have nowadays that we need also to connect more the transport and mobility sector to other approaches and fields, since there are co-benefits and big synergies. For instance, and I think Han already mentioned some examples, when we think about reducing traffic congestion, we're also talking about reducing air and noise pollution and therefore increasing public health, or reducing accidents and therefore increasing safety. Or when we talk about space and place, creating walkable spaces could improve accessibility, social cohesion, and public space. And the last point are the citizens' awareness and engagement. I think in all of our projects and in all the sectors, we are trying to also bring this as an important pillar to co-design, co-implement interventions in mobility or in all the other sectors. And yeah, we can keep discussing in the breakout room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eliane. It started with a very casual conversation last year, and this is where we are today. And it's really wonderful that Gillian is going to join you in your breakout room. But right now, Gillian's colleague, Etiv, is going to talk about place and play, because we know that youth cannot be very far from any climate action planning that as a city we need to take on. So Etiv, it's all yours. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, and thank you for having us along today. It's really nice to be joining this session. Gillian, my colleague, is on this call as well, and no doubt some of you will be speaking to her later. I'm Etiv Curry, and I'm the spatial planning lead in our spatial. We have a research and development element of our development plan, so part of our policies. So it's about developing new policies, and also how do we take those policies and turn them into action on the ground. Next slide, please. So today I'll talk a little bit about the kind of tools that we're using and we find helpful in Scotland to help deliver on nature-based solutions, taking a nature-based approach, and what does that mean for place and placemaking in the future. So this is something that Gillian was heavily involved in. It's the Horizon 2020. It was the co-impact approach, where if you take one action, what does that mean on different elements of an entire project? And it's this kind of continuous loop of survey, analysis, and plan. So that makes it really important that you're continually checking are we doing the right things? Are we doing it for the right reasons? And, you know, does it all fit together at the end of the day? Next slide, please. And this is something that I was a co-designer of. It's the Scottish Place Standard tool, and the WHO have, their quote is, "It's Scotland's gift to the globe." And this is very much about taking the 14 dimensions of place. So we talk about movement, we talk about movement of people, movement of traffic, we talk about natural spaces, play, housing, services, facilities, whether you feel safe or not, how do people perceive themselves in each different neighbourhood. So it's a really easy and free tool to use. It has a huge evidence base that sits behind it. It's built upon the wider determinants of health. So what it is we ask 14 different questions about the place. It's around about what it is to like in a place. So it gathers that lived experience as well as giving the place a score, a numeric score. So it's a 1 to 7 score, and it creates a spider graph. And it's all about how we create better places, better quality places. And it's taking that more holistic view on place. So we can't just focus on housing. So I always think of place as a jigsaw. And if you focus on one part too much, that part becomes really, really big. And there's no way that you can have a sustainable place. You know, so if you look at housing and just housing that you drive to, and there's no green spaces and no walkways or anything like that, you know, that's not a very sustainable place. So we hope with the Place Standard tool that it's an initial discussion, so it brings everybody together. It doesn't matter what you do. You know, you can be a chief exec of a company or somebody that lives in the neighbourhood. You're all talking about the same thing at the same point in time. And we've had really high success with this. WHO Healthy Cities Network use it across Europe, and we've translated it into, I think it's about 15 or 16 different languages now. So that's something, if people want to find out more about, you can come and talk to us. Next slide, please. This is something new. The Scottish Government have now set the 33 policies for Scotland. So every local authority is using the same policy set. So it's about livable places, sustainable places, and productive places. So that's the 3 things that the Scottish Government have set us to say, how do we develop and deliver the guidance? So what is the handbook for spatial planning moving forward? And this is our initial work on living well locally. And it brings together things like local centres. It's like everybody needs a house to live in. Everybody takes a daily journey. You know, what do you do as a human being on a daily basis? You walk, you cycle, you might get a bus, you might drive, you go to work, you might have a medical appointment. So we're trying to build from the stories that people tell us, so the lived experience that people are telling us in Glasgow by using the Place Standard tool. We're trying to bring that all together to create a handbook, a design handbook that for our neighbourhoods across the city. And because we're not creating new places in Glasgow, it's very much a retrofit. So how do we begin to, you know, meet our climate challenges? How do we provide better housing, a range of housing? You know, how far do people have to travel to buy what's important to them daily? And finally, next slide, please. This is a new thing coming out of the Scottish Government. Every municipality's been asked to survey and assess play across the city, their cities and towns and rural areas. And it's about asking young people and children and young people, where do they go? What do they do? And what kind of things would they like to do? So I think it's like from primary school, we did a very much a gamed it. So we asked the teachers to take the children out and see, how do you, what do you do? Where can you jump? Where can you jump in a puddle? Where can you swing from a tree? Can you throw a ball? Can you shout? Can you scream? Can you just run about crazy? So we got, I think it was about 500 responses. And then for secondary school, it was really important. So high school age, it was really important for us to co-design our approach with the high school children. So, young adults, they're maybe a bit embarrassed that they still like to, swing on a swing or, climb a tree or whatever it is. I personally like to still kick up leaves in the autumn and, not averse to jumping in a bit of a muddy puddle. And I'm sure our children are, your child is still within you and an adult. So it's about designing places, co-designing places with young people that they feel comfortable in, and that they feel that they can control, and that they feel that they may, want to share with others, and that they just feel safe. That's the most important thing, I think, is for them to be feeling safe. And sadly, we got over 5,500 high school children responding to this. And, our methodology, and sadly, most children spent their time in shopping malls, which I felt is really sad, that, young people of today, they're not enjoying outdoors. They went outdoors, but they didn't feel safe in the outdoors. And it wasn't necessarily the outdoor spaces. It was about how the other people that used those spaces, they were wary of them, and they just didn't feel safe. So that's our biggest challenge. So the next step is that we're hoping to find a site and co-design that site with the initial group of children that helped us to co-design the methodology. And I think with the tools that we're using in Glasgow, we're trying to bring together everything in a holistic way. We're trying to listen to people's voices of all ages, all able-bodied and people with disabilities, because one of the high schools that we had a fantastic response for was people with assisted learning needs. And their biggest thing was that they didn't feel as if they felt part of the other young people's activities. So quiet spaces are really important in our public realm, and parks, as well as spaces that people can just shout and scream and let some steam off. And I think I'll leave it there, and hopefully we have a chance to speak further in the future. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Etiv. This was really, we can't move ahead till our youth, our children are not with us. And now I'd like to invite a very dear colleague, Luca from ICLEI Europe, who is working on the adaptation mission. And it's very important for the two missions to start talking, or let's say they've begun. The Climate Week in Valencia was a fabulous showcase of how the two missions put together their events and their talks, and how we could, actually communicate with each other. Luca, the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining.
Thanks a lot, and hi everyone. As Nupur also mentioned, with my presentation also a bit closing after all these very interesting presentations, I wanted to look again at climate action more broadly, and understanding how basically we are measuring benefits and co-benefits of adaptation, and on adaptation and mitigation on both aspects. Next slide. To do this, I wanted to start with an example. I'm working, as Nupur said, on the mission on adaptation, but also on the Covenant of Mayors Europe. Many of you may know that the Covenant of Mayors is an initiative by the European Commission, which in Europe only has almost 12,000 signatories. which are working on three main pillars, which are mitigation, adaptation, and energy poverty, and are very much welcome and like also pushed to work like in interconnected action on these three aspects. These signatories submit action plans, and I think like where I want to go with this slide is just a first reflection with you on basically some numbers. So the 82% of these plans are only focusing on mitigation, while the 18% of them are focusing on both mitigation and adaptation. This is, I mean, it can be also explained historically, but the point I want to make here is that basically even if the city is expressing their interest in working on mitigation, specifically in this 82% of plans, it's not only the case that they are working on it, but most probably they will have some effects on also the adaptation sphere. And that's why, next slide, the European Environment Agency has developed a study on the plans from the signatories of the Covenant of Mayors to understand a bit better which were the benefits that basically they were creating, that the different cities were creating with their climate action plans, and basically also which were the trade-offs in the other sphere that they were creating. So looking at both adaptation and mitigation. As you can see here, of course, taking like an action of greening cities, so developing nature-based solutions, for example, can have co-benefits on both mitigation and adaptation. Of course, like using air conditioning as a solution for adaptation could create trade-offs in the mitigation sphere. So it's interesting how in this publication that I put here, and I really suggest everyone to have a look at it because it's very interesting. The EA has tried to highlight which are those spheres where basically climate action is having the highest number of co-benefits in both the adaptation and mitigation spheres. Next example. It's coming from some work that we have developed with 40 specific cities that had to implement climate adaptation action. But basically these cities were supported by a number of experts that were working with them, and they were supporting in understanding which were the direct benefits that they were creating and some co-benefits that they were also creating. This is to say that climate action is not only producing benefits on adaptation and mitigation, but the benefits are going much forward, much beyond that, and also going to health and well-being and etc. So we need to really acknowledge this and understand where we can create basically co-benefits and avoid trade-offs. And this is why also we have already existing platforms, and let's go to the next slide, that allow cities to report on the action they're taking and on also understanding how to measure the benefits they are also encountering in their own local context. And one example is the MyCovenant, that as you can see, it's a very used platform with both, let's say, more mitigation-focused inventory and an adaptation-focused inventory, as well as an energy poverty focused. And this goes into details to understand, like, basically how to quantify basically how the cities are doing well or not in their adaptation. And this is also to benchmark cities' action and to understand how to improve their action plan for the next ambition. The next one is also an interesting platform that is the CDP Clay Track, which is a very comprehensive platform for cities to report on both adaptation and mitigation. As you can see here, and the point that I want to make with this slide is that not only this platform has a focus on very adaptation and very mitigation related aspects, as can be a vulnerability risk assessment, for example. But what I find very interesting is that there is also a look into the mixed focus, like on basically a sectoral analysis of benefits and co-benefits. And this is very important because I think it's what cities need to focus on and need to like really steer their energies towards in the future. That is taking not, for example, when reporting on adaptation, a threat and hazard-based approach, but rather a field approach, because this is the approach that is also making sure that they can measure not only adaptation benefits, but benefits on mitigation and health, etc. So with this, I just wanted to do a quick overview. I'm very happy to continue the discussion in the breakout group. And if you need anything, you will also have my email in the slides.
Thank you very much, Luca. I'm going to just post a message. I mean, it's amazing. We are dot on time, maybe a few minutes before. But just to say, please look at the breakout room numbers and select of your choice. The speakers or the panelists and the rapporteurs will be directed themselves to these breakout rooms. But everyone, you can go to the NBS room, you can go to the New European Bauhaus room, you can go, and the NBS and Play and Play room have been combined to the room number 1, New European Bauhaus to room number 2, transport, mobility, behavioral change around mobility to room number 3, and then adaptation and mitigation to room number 4. Thank you very much to the pitches by the panelists, and let's go into these breakout rooms and report back in 30 minutes. Thank you very much. Those who've already joined, can you please go to the Slido, scan the QR code, answer the 2 questions. We are really wanting a beautiful word cloud till the rapporteurs come in and they can start presenting. Please scan the QR code, and we would love to see a word cloud on the 2 questions in the Slido. Thank you very much. As time is going to run very fast, I'm going to request the rapporteurs for the 4 breakout rooms to please come in and do a quick reporting. I can start with the first one, which was about nature-based solutions, place and play. We were right in the middle of a question being asked when we came back into the main plenary. And I think that question is summing up what we began in this room with Ingrid and Atif. The question was that everyone understands the benefits of nature-based solutions, nature-based systems, We're looking at good cases. Can we in any way standardize reporting on this across the very many cities, globe, municipalities, nations? And I would take us back to the comment that Ingrid made on this, which was that while we're looking at standards, we need to understand that the story is very unique to each context, each neighborhood, each city, each nation, each geography. So I'm going to report a little bit more at the end, depending on time, but I hand over to the rapporteur, Naomi from breakout room number 2. And Naomi, you have about 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Yes, the 3 main takeaways from our breakout room was the role of indicators in establishing common ground between various perspectives. This establishes some common ground to discuss on. And then another takeaway was the key issue in trying to qualify or trying to quantify health impacts is making the link between the physical actions and the intangible or co-benefit impacts. And the approach of this impact model is to start by qualifying the impacts, then quantifying them, and then creating a model that built a sort of economic case to be able to justify the impacts. And that's all from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Naomi, for this, as well as for helping organize the whole event. I now hand it over to the rapporteur from breakout room 3. Paul, are you going to present from mobility?
Yeah, I can do that. So we had a few different questions that we considered, but the first one where it all started was the question, what do you think about when someone asks you what you need to live well locally? And there were a few different answers, things like the ability to access social benefits or recreational activities. We also had another discussion about the difference between spaces and places, but so people need accessibility to go through the spaces to get to places where they have an emotional connection. But then the conversation started to shift towards the really important need for dialogue between different stakeholders, including citizens, on what exactly a livable street is or a livable place, and what kind of infrastructure do citizens want. And then we started to talk about how, of course, different types of people and have different interests, and how do you balance that with designing a place. And I think one interesting point there was, at the end of the day, like, we want to encourage collaboration and consensus building, but it's not always possible, and tough decisions need to be made. And when you're making these tough decisions, the idea of being risk aware being aware of the risk of the controversy is a better approach than just being risk averse, because lots of infrastructure does become popular later, especially when it has these benefits of other co-benefits like mental health and other health benefits, honestly. And so then we started talking about co-benefits and indicators, and also spoke about how, like, a park, for example, when you're looking at it financially, it does help the community in lots of ways that have financial benefits, but are not evaluated or not enough evaluated when you're looking at the costs of a park. So there's different ways to evaluate different kinds of infrastructure.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Paul. I now take you to reporting back from the breakout room 4 on adaptation and mitigation. Kirsten, are you going to take us through?
So in the adaptation breakout group, we basically discussed a little bit around questions Luca was posing. For example, what are the experiences around reporting platforms? And for example, in the case of Botswana, it's more the national government which is reporting. So the aim here is to integrate more the local level and also link it better. Or, for example, in Bangladesh, there were some experiences with multi-sectoral platforms linking the local level government with rural farmers and city dwellers. Another question was also, not a question, but more a remark, that in the context of co-benefits indicator reporting, it is important to talk about the semantics and to support here, like to translate what is meant by this question and how you can actually also, yeah, report basically, for example, bundling different, answering in bundles and integrating different measures. And one of the things here is also, which Luca pointed out, that it's not only about you integrating or aligning the CDP track and McCovenant, for example, but all the other initiatives that are also working with their own indicators. And in the end, we also talked a little bit about other declarations, agreements that are from importance in the sector, like the Paris Agreement, or also on trade-offs when it comes to enforcing climate adaptation actions. For example, green infrastructure and how this also can cause green gentrification. And Luca, feel free to add if you see something missing.
Thank you, Kirsten. I think it's wonderful that we have a word cloud as well, and we've heard so many different things. We have about a few minutes. I can now introduce myself and where this whole idea came from. I have to thank many, many colleagues, but we were looking, because we were going back to the cities, talking about the mandatory greenhouse gas emissions they needed to report in their climate city contracts. We were also looking at what the cities were asking for. And every time we went to talk to a city directly, we talked about the mandatory emissions, but then the conversation always was about what's the health of its citizens, the scarcity of water, nature-based solutions, greenery, access to greenery. And I'll give a very quick example. I'm right now in the city of Braga, and a lot of conversations on historic buildings and retrofitting these historic buildings, taking care of the captured carbon in these historic buildings. The idea was that we need to retrofit them for all the elderly that are living there, that want to live there. They don't want to move into a multi-generational household. They want their environment to be made more comfortable by conservation architects. So the idea here was that we talk about something which people can't see. It's very critical to map these greenhouse gas emissions, but how can we work with the lowest common denominator? And I think the lowest common denominator across all our mission cities in Europe, all cities across the world, is actually health, well-being, access to nature, looking at giving or providing solutions which are holistic and cultural. Because if we're going to be importing solutions from Portugal to, let's say, the city of Lahti, it's not really going to necessarily work. So when we were in the city of Lahti and we were talking about mobility, Lahti said really what we are interested in is not mobility infrastructure. We are interested in looking at behavioral change. When we went to the city of Uppsala, which is a city of universities, Uppsala said we're looking at circular construction, but what really excites us or interests us or we think is very relevant, urgent, is the students come and go and they throw all the stuff they use in their interiors without thinking of reuse, revaluing them, making them ready for someone else's to use who comes into the apartment. So these are such basic questions. And we went into carbon budgeting, participatory budgeting. But the reason we wanted to have such a session is because with many, many colleagues here within Net Zero Cities, and I cannot leave without thanking them by name, we wouldn't have come to this session. They are not directly involved probably in organizing it, but they are the wind beneath our wings to actually have us going. I'm going to thank Mira, Julia Rowlands, Julia K. from VTT, Nikhil, Paul, Meline, Mayanka, Lita, Sabrina, Rohit, who are talking about the whole sustainable development goals, because eventually the KPIs, are they going to be city-centric, national, global? All the options are available. But like Ingrid presented, we have to put the cities foremost, their needs foremost, their choices, how they want to report, where they want to report, which indicators they want to work with. And we as the technical specialists have to come in and facilitate that. So thank you again to Kirsten Also Jennifer, Alan, Marina, Gerkshin, Mareike. Of course, I said Naomi multiple times because she's really important to this whole thing. And please, a big hand to Joanna and Rebecca to actually have helped us. But firstly, Debanjana, we won't be able to give you space just now, but please put in chat what you'd like to add. But I'd like to give a big round of applause to all the panelists. You cannot imagine how many meetings we've had with them. You're only looking at the session, but the prep behind and the time they've given us from many different geographies is really nothing short of a miracle. With people being so busy, they still see the importance of this. Thank you very, very much. I would like to end on time. So I would also like to also say that we've tried to put in a bit of a reading list here. If you would like to add something from your projects, please use the chat happily. We are very happy for you to do it. And just before we finish, I'd like to invite you to the next Daring Cities event, just to say that our rapporteurs here were from very different fields, from finance, from policy, from greenhouse gas inventories. So it's really wonderful that everyone was talking about place, space, well-being, nature, European Bauhaus. It's just, I think this is really a miracle. But thank you very much. You will get the recording. I'm going to end now for our organizers to play a short video thanking everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.